That's great. Thank you.
Is it showing full screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Does look like we have 17 people on, which is a pretty good turnout. And we could go ahead and get started and just go through the agenda. Instead of doing any introductions, we thought today we could just ask you to put your name and your title of the organization you're with in the chat. That would be a great way for everyone to know who's here. I believe everybody's met each other already. And I guess I should check in. Is there anyone here today who's new to the process, who hasn't made it to a meeting so far? And if so, do you want to just say hi and introduce yourself?
Oh, so maybe not. Johanna, do we need to now make the interpretation announcement and then set up that channel?
Yeah, that would be great. Rosabelle, do you mind making that announcement?
Not at all. Muy buenos días. En cuestiones de justicia lingüística vamos a tener interpretación simultánea al español. En un momento, en cuanto habiliten la cabina de interpretación, van a ver un globo abajo y a mano derecha, si pueden pulsar y elegir español. Si están en un teléfono celular, van a ver 3 puntitos, ahí van a pulsar, van a buscar interpretación y buscar su idioma. So in the name of linguistic justice, I started out in Spanish, and secondly, the explanation I'm about to give you is that you will see a globe as soon as they put me in the interpreting channel that you can press and go to English. Select English, even if you are bilingual, select a channel or select English, because that way you will be able to exchange ideas across the board. Thank you very much. And they're about to put me in the channel. Thank you very much.
And Johanna, are you doing that or am I? I'm sorry.
No, do you mind doing that? Go ahead.
Okay, only the host can do that. So whoever's host needs to put me in, or give it to me and I'll put myself in, but that scares me a little. So. Yes.
Okay, so I think we are good. I will put the agenda back up on the screen. Bear with me.
Thank you so much to our interpreters. And thank you, Paul, for handling the technology in the background for us. So our agenda today, we have a goal, a pretty ambitious goal, which is to narrow our list of ideas to 3 to 5 ideas, with at least one being a moonshot idea. You know, shooting for the moon. What's different? What's innovative? What hasn't been done before? Or taking on something that is happening and making it even more creative and more innovative, and something sort of, you know, we're going to hit it out of the ballpark. We are going to go over the survey results, and Paul again played a huge role in this by designing the survey and then creating the results and sharing them with everyone. Paul, I don't know if you want to say anything about that. You'll be certainly leading that part of the meeting.
Well, thanks, Karen. Yeah, we wanted to run through the results as a group. I think that, you know, Karen and I have certainly looked at them and come to some thoughts on what they reflect. So I think that we as a group should look through it together and discuss, and folks can kind of raise their thoughts on what they're seeing, what themes they've seen, and, you know, how we possibly can best move forward based on the data that's there. I mean, understanding that the survey isn't necessarily some objective be-all end-all determination of what we're going to do. It's really intended to inform our discussion as a group of what we as a group have kind of identified as the priority buckets, themes, ideas. Thanks.
So we'll spend about a half hour doing that. And we do ask that people keep their comments down to 2 minutes or less, just so we can try to hear from everybody in that half hour. And then we'll move into another hour of distilling it down to hopefully 3 to 5 ideas. And then we'll end the meeting talking about next steps. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Paul, if you want to talk a little bit about the survey results and share that with folks. Paul, you're muted, so we can't hear you right now.
I'm going to share a different view, so bear with me. Also wanted to confirm if somebody's taking notes, because I was hoping to take notes, but since I'm going to be moving between these windows, I don't really have that opportunity. But I believe somebody from our team is taking notes. Is that correct?
Johanna, or somebody from the county, I think maybe was taking notes. Is that correct?
Oh,
I have it.
Aisa. Okay. Yeah,
Aisa's
thanks,
in the
Aisa. I see
chat.
Aisa in the chat. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Aisa.
Okay, great,
So
thanks.
the view that I'm going to share is from the survey itself. It's a little bit more interactive. So again, what I want to do, I'm going to just kind of share a couple of quick thoughts that I think Karen and I shared together, and then, we'll open it up for discussion at that point. So I have way too many windows open. There it is. So this is the kind of the interactive response window, and I hope you all can see it big enough. So looking at this first question that we asked, where we wanted to just kind of get folks feeling for how they would prioritize the buckets, we feel that what's reflected here is a pretty clear choice of the top 3. So that being increase affordable, sustainable housing inventory, land building acquisition for affordable housing, and then the promote equity and accessibility. Keeping in mind that this one is the one that kind of informs the whole process and informs all others. So as you see here, what this is showing us, sorry for the mouse overs, but you can see, is the first choice. We had basically 10 votes. So first choice 1, second choice 6, third choice 1. So it's kind of a weighted system in this Microsoft Forms interface. So what you're looking at here is, these top 2 were really a high, showed up quite frequently as a first, second, or third choice for everybody, with the third bucket here, equity and accessibility, getting a lot of first place votes, so to speak. Any questions or comments or thoughts kind of on this first view of prioritizing the buckets? So next, I think if we look at each of these buckets, so if we go to the question on increase affordable, sustainable housing inventory, this bucket, we kind of see, these top choices. So 1 is inventory and invest in shovel-ready pipeline projects. So we had talked about that. The acquisition of scattered sites for permanently affordable housing. And the next one, purchasing of existing rental buildings that could be transitioned into affordable housing. So there is, there's a little bit of overlap there. Michael, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I sorry, I had a hard time finding the reaction button. Moving up to the prior one, and this also reflects a number of the rankings. I was just curious about how to rank the differences, especially like with equity. And because equity informs all of the different choices, it seems like they're not competing at all. And so that happened in a number of cases where it seems like the choice was between 2 complementary choices versus 2 competing choices.
Yeah, I understand that. I think that's, that's part of the challenge that we need to face. And that's why, I think we're supporting the thought that this survey is not necessarily a be all end all determination of where we go. It's more just kind of informing the discussion. So I think that those kind of either conflicts or redundancies, however you want to look at them, should inform that discussion going forward. And I don't know if there is anything specific that you want to call out kind of in the buckets here, where you would consider that would make an impact on what we're viewing here.
Sure. To go back to the initial point, if we think of promote equity as basically a component of everything, then the way I read these rankings would be increase affordability is first, land building acquisition is second, financial relief is third, where all of those components, we're feeling a strong need to weight them in terms of how money is distributed so that equity is served.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I misunderstood your initial question, but yeah, I mean, I personally would agree with that. I would agree that, this one is not necessarily a category on the same kind of scale or level as the others, because it is part of all of it and informs all of them. So in a way, this one almost gets knocked out. If that, I don't mean to use that phrase, but I think that, yeah, I would say as far as where individual ideas are going to come from, if we want to look at the top 3 areas, it would be these 2, and then financial relief and assistance.
And I think it just supports what we all came to an agreement on, which is that equity accessibility bucket pours into every bucket, so that's the lens we're using as we're deciding the 3 to 5 ideas that we want to end up focusing on in our next steps, making sure that we have that equity accessibility lens on.
Any other questions or thoughts before we kind of move into looking at those buckets and what the results there were? So yeah, looking at the increase affordable sustainable housing inventory bucket. So again, it was the invest in shovel-ready pipeline projects to accelerate production, acquisition of scattered sites for permanently affordable home ownership, and purchase existing rental buildings that could be transitioned into affordable housing. And also acknowledging, again, even among some of these, there is overlap. So stressing that, we're not necessarily saying that since these are the top 2 or 3, you can also see in these results, there is some balance here in terms of, even the 4th, the so-called 5th place option got a good amount of a play as far as some 1st and 2nd place votes. Excuse me. So I think that what we're seeing here is some balance, but again, there's also some overlap here. And just as a reminder that, we had sent this out beforehand. So, you've got a view of some of this, and I may actually switch to the PowerPoint view because I think the mouse overs are a little bit tough for me. And I'm imagining that maybe it's making it tough for you all. So bear with me again. So again, from the buckets, if we go to the second, what we're calling the second one, land and building acquisition, if we look at that one, oh, sorry, my screen is, that's housing, sorry, I'm not seeing that one.
You have hit on it a couple times.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
It's not that one.
No, I think it's one after, isn't it? Nope, the next one. There we go. Oh, you were there and then it went away.
Yeah.
So there.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, sorry, it's behind the thing on me. So in this one, the ideas that kind of came out on top were work with BHP and other nonprofit developers, grants or low to no interest loans for MHP, and then purchase existing buildings. So this one even touches on, one of the ones that we saw in the other, in the previous category, as far as, purchasing existing buildings. So slightly balanced as far as a top few and then a next few there. And then finally, the other bucket was financial relief assistance for housing, and that's this one here. So again, kind of a balance among these top four: expanding eviction prevention services, property tax assistance, targeted rental assistance, and then the middle income assistance one. Expand an existing program that could purchase market rate units, make minor rehabs, and then resell at a 20% reduced price as a deed restricted home, condo, townhome. So Michael, I see your hand is up. I don't know if that's a new question or the previous one. Oh, maybe it was the previous one.
That was previous, sorry.
Thanks, no problem. So, again, I'm not, I can get into thoughts on this at any level, but I think really what we're after is using this survey and using these thoughts to really kind of inform the discussion that follows. So I'll throw it out there for anybody that may have any questions or thoughts on what they felt about the survey and what it showed.
And you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. Just Anna.
Yeah, I felt like the survey had a lot of overlap, and that the two sections about one was more focused on buildings and the other one on land, that should have all been one. These are all different strategies, and they're increasing the number of units. So. And I agree also on that one that was like, this will pour over the equity lens. It's more of a lens than a bucket in itself. So I have a hard time now, understanding exactly how we're moving forward, because the group is all over the place a little bit. Not all over the place. There are clear. Sorry?
Okay, right now the interpretation sees temporarily on the language side, two interpreters are going to be placed in because we need to work this in tandem and do all the previous instructions once you see the globe. En cuanto vean el globo, por favor, rehabiliten la interpretación, dispense por la interrupción. Now you can put us in, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah,
thank you, Anna. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
If there's anything that you guys have in mind on how, I'm sure you do, how we're moving forward now that we have these results. If we can consolidate things to see how they rank when they're all combined, because you already asked the question. So that was kind of like my question.
Thanks, Anna. And I think, we'll look to the group to answer your question about how we will consolidate those and move forward. So let's see if this just kind of unfolds organically, and, just try to see if we can go towards some sort of agreed upon next steps. So Claire?
Hi, thank you. Let me put my hand down first. So, well, I have a couple of questions about, how we're going to go about ranking these and making decisions. Some of these are big ticket items, and I think we need a way to figure out how many, how we can serve the most people with the money we have. But this gets into methodology a little bit here too, because this group may decide that that is not actually the goal, to serve the most people. It might be to try to serve people in different sectors. Serving people who are unhoused, and serving low-income renters, and trying to create some homeownership opportunities. So I think we need to talk about that, talk about whether we want to really focus on a particular population and a particular approach, or whether we want to try to allocate some money to different populations. So that's just something that I guess I think I've been mulling over a little bit. But I also had a question on the items within the increase affordable sustainable housing inventory survey question, and it's the option to set up capacity for a regional approach to creating a countywide homeownership program. And region-wide capacity to implement inclusionary housing. I would like to hear a little bit more about what that would look like, and whether that is actually a place where we would park money, or is that maybe administrative backbone for funds that might otherwise be available. I just need to know a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, I think we might ask whomever had put that idea into the idea sheet if they would like to speak to those specifics.
Yes, just unmute yourself and then share with us what you know.
This is Kurt Fernhaber. Claire, so I can respond to that, and then I've got other questions, but I'll leave those till later. So that's a part of the Regional Housing Partnership program, and that's a proposal that is currently put together now to support the mountain communities, Louisville, Lafayette, Superior, the town of Erie, into helping them launch and provide the regulatory background foundation, actually, to launch the new IH ordinances that they put in place, or they're in the process of putting in place. So once their IH programs are up and running, that would be financially self-sustainable. This would simply be covering the first couple of years of that cost. So it's cost for the administrative and policy and regulatory staff that would be required on a regional basis to get those IH programs working effectively in each community. And it's also part of that is the ownership program, which we're exploring in launching on a regional basis as well. So it would support, I think, what was number 2, which was on one of the scattered sites.
And so one thing I wanted to just say to everyone is what we were envisioning is, let's say that becomes one of the 3 to 5 initiatives and ideas that everyone agrees we should pursue more. Then what would likely happen is a small group of people who, 2 or 3 would actually form a little committee, and they would work on this and present at our next meeting a fleshed out, project analysis. What does it look like? Who does it serve? And then maybe all the different ideas in the survey that it touches on, because as everybody said, so many of these overlap. And so anyways, that's kind of an explanation to the question of how are we going to move forward, is by considering these ideas and then forming teams who will work between now and our meeting in 2 weeks to really dig deeper. So Paul, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about that.
No, I think that's a great kind of view of what we would have in mind as far as next steps, and then how we kind of work on fleshing out these 3 to 5 ideas that we come up with.
Okay, next we have Anne Marie.
Hi. Sorry, I have to turn everything on because my internet's unstable. I had a question about the equity bucket that we're talking about as overriding all the other buckets. And it seems to me we need, hold on there, I need to shut my door, sorry. We need some principles for what we mean by that. And for example, do we mean traditionally marginalized groups who have not shared in housing in Boulder County in the same way that, you know, white middle-class Americans have? Do we mean immigrants? Do we mean people of color? Do we mean the disabled? Or do we mean people who were more disproportionately affected during the pandemic, such as, you know, certain kind of workers that, you know, hourly rate workers or service employees or whatever. And whatever we mean, as we look at our options, I think we need to be specific about how we intend to make up for the lack of equity and think through, for example, are we going to give preference to people who were unfairly less employed or disadvantaged during the pandemic? And if we are, how are we going to do that? And I think this is actually more complex and requires a little bit of really thinking through what we are willing to do in terms of any option. Are we going to have preference points for certain groups? You know, and I think it starts to get controversial, and therefore that's why I think we need to do some work on it and own it and just sort of really see what we think we mean. Because when we talk about it, if we're not specific, I think everybody has a different opinion about what that means.
Thank you, Anne Marie. And Paul did put into the chat the guiding questions for any project or idea having to do with what will make an impact on those hardest hit by the pandemic. So that addresses that point you made. Will this program be able to be administered quickly? How can we implement this program in ways that will be transformational? Does this address equity? And as you said, equity is a big word. It covers a lot of things. And I'm not sure we can say which, you know, I'm not sure how if we actually want to try to distill it down to just one or two equity situations, or just try to address it broad stroke. That's a great question. And when implemented, would this program meet our shared goals? And then will it require additional county resources? So I just thought I'd speak that just as a reminder to, you know, what is sort of like our North Star, our guiding principles. And another thought, Anne Marie, is maybe there is a small group who that's what they go out and study on in the next 2 weeks, you know, to be more specific about that. And the bucket, the equity accessibility bucket pours into each bucket. I just want to make sure you understand that, as opposed to overriding it. It just pours into each bucket. So it needs to be considered for every bucket. So thank you very much. Kurt, and then we'll go back to Michael Pierce.
Thank you. So I'll just give some of my reactions, and I think this presentation and the outcomes of the survey have been very helpful. So thanks to Paul and others that worked on that. I like the idea of the shovel-ready sites and the in supporting the pipeline. It's worth noting that our housing authorities in Longmont, Boulder County, and City of Boulder are probably helping the most or the widest diversity of individuals as far as AMIs, and it's also it's become over the last 2 years a very strong tool for helping individuals experiencing homelessness, as almost all developments under the housing authorities are now housing individuals that have been previously homeless. And I know that was where some of the questions were. The other proposal that I wanted to say something about is grants for infrastructure to mobile home properties. I support that with the caveat that it be targeted towards resident-owned communities. I think there's a challenge in providing improvements to private infrastructure and owners of mobile home parks. It really benefits them the most. So I would have a concern about that. But resident-owned parks, that seems like a good approach. The eviction prevention, there's been a lot of coordination regionally around this. I think the rental assistance is the one component of that I think needs to be solved for, but there is current funding for it now. So I think we would need to work with the county staff to understand what the gaps are that we're trying to fill there. And then there is work being done on the capacity proposal around inclusionary housing and home ownership. And Molly and Paul are part of that, but I would just invite, if there's anyone else on this call that wanted to participate in that over the next couple of weeks, to let us know. That would be great to have someone else join us for that.
Thank you, Kurt. Michael?
Thanks. So I had one as a procedural suggestion, sort of bridging off of the procedural point I made just a while back, and to give you an example, another issue that seemed like we're talking about complementary versus competing is the investment in shovel-ready projects, and my understanding of that was one of the ways that the ARPA money could be leveraged for uses that have less strings attached, was to spend the money on projects that are ready to roll right now, and then use the county money that's freed up to put into all of the other buckets that we were talking about. And so what struck me was that is not really a competing item, but rather it's a way of getting enough money to put into whatever priority items we would like to put our money into. And so the procedural suggestion is some of these items, it seems like are best to be kind of taken off of the ranking list and considered as helping the other items. The second point I was hoping to make was in response to Claire's point about how to use the methodology of ranking things. And I was just hoping to emphasize two kinds of goals that strike me as both good but separate ones. And one is measuring displacement. And so the kinds of things we could do that would prevent people from losing the homes that they already are in, and use that as an important measure. And then the other is what I see more standardly used is just the number of affordable units that happen to be available within the county as an inventory of affordable units. So the two seem like they're separate measures, and you can have a nice inventory of affordable units, yet people are being displaced very frequently. So I was hoping that in our methodology we do focus on displacement as something we want to prevent.
Thank you. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet who would like to address the group now regarding the survey or anything that's been said or our process moving forward, next steps?
Oops.
Anyone else?
This is Molly O'Donnell. I'm trying to find my hand, but I can't find it. Sorry. I think I
felt you.
clapped. I clapped. I have something that I want Leslie's input on, and if this is for a later time, that's fine. I just want to insert the plug for now. I would like to get her interpretation of how the ARPA regulations apply to what we call attainable or middle tier housing. Some of the proposals have opportunities to consider both or one or the other. Affordable, it doesn't, from what I can see, the ARPA funds don't completely restrict affordable housing to the definition provided by HUD, which is below 80% of median income. But I'd like to confirm that attainable is eligible. So Leslie, if you, I saw you on here. Are you there still?
I am here.
Okay. Have you already looked into this, or can we just put this on the list to look into?
Yeah, and I'm happy to provide a memo out to folks that I already have. But for affordable housing development, basically Treasury looks at the program guidelines for home, and then National Housing Trust Fund as the parameters, and they are income constrained. You can have a certain small percentage, I think under home up to 80% AMI. I think it might be 10%. I'd need to look again. But the National Housing Trust Fund was, I think, even more constrained at a lower income. And those are, I don't have it in front of me, but they're more in the 60% AMI, 50% AMI neighborhood. And then you have to have in the mix some very low income housing at 30% AMI.
So attainable seems to be off the list.
Unless,
is that what I'm hearing?
Unless it's done out of a different bucket. And here's where it gets a little wonky and confusing, but I'll just let you know. And I'm not dangling this for all of the groups. I just think it fits best with this group. So Boulder County did opt into a one-time revenue reduction of $10 million. And that has a little more flexibility in that bucket. We can fund government services out of that bucket. And so there is a separate bucket that the commissioners could decide we want to do above that income affordable housing, a certain percentage of affordable income, affordable housing at higher incomes out of that more flexible bucket. That would be a commissioner level decision. And I see Commissioner Levy has her hand up.
Leslie, not on that. So finish whatever you were going to say.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Molly?
Thank you.
I'll send you the memo since you're a housing wonk. I might send, I'm happy to send it to the whole group, or you and Kurt or whoever really understands those programs, because I'm not a housing person, but it's really the home program and National Housing Trust Fund are our parameters.
Okay, I just want to check, Anne Marie, your hand is still up. Is that just you need to take it down, or did you have something else you wanted to say before we move to Claire? Okay. It looks like the hand's down now. So Claire, the floor is yours.
Oh, yep, thanks again. And I'm just jumping around through these slides a little bit, and then questions occur to me that hadn't occurred to me before. Working with BHP on pipeline projects to provide gap funding, I think that makes a lot of sense. But here's the question. So I'm really glad Laura Scheinbaum is here. What's in the pipeline, and what could we achieve in greater affordability by investing in some of these projects? So that's one question I have, and another one that I was thinking about on this same slide on purchasing existing buildings and subsidized rental costs, which I think that's a great opportunity to try to preserve existing, sort of affordable. But this is a question maybe Laura Kurt might know the answer to, about whether we can, the timeline is such that we could put some of this money into some other package to buy a building. If we're not going to do a LIHTC purchase so that it would immediately be deed restricted, would we have to basically make an all cash offer or something here? Or how would we structure that so that we're not trying to use these funds, and not be able to leverage them with others?
We do see in the chat that Kurt said that the county is almost done with the pipeline and will share with the group.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was going to add that we put all of our pipeline projects into a document the other day that, and there's a lot of them, quite frankly. So that could be really helpful, especially buying down affordability, because, like 40s and 50s and 60s, there starts to be capture rate issues with private developers who are developing in the affordable realm, but they seem to put their affordability limits at 60% of AMI. So when we can go deeper, that's really helpful. So Claire, I don't know that we want to spend the time right now going through each of those, but there's—
No, we don't need to.
Yeah. In terms of purchasing, that is a little tricky because if you have to covenant those units right away with 60% and below AMI, which it sounds like we might, that could potentially lead to some displacement. So I think the structure of that, we just need to be thoughtful about, like, could we purchase it, like you suggest, with cash resources that are not ARPA money, and then have those replenished in some way so it's not going directly to that purchase, so we can transition to affordable, so the displacement is not acute, so to speak. We, the last thing we want to do, and we're very conscious of this when we buy apartment buildings, is that we bring affordability in over time so that we, as people naturally attrition out of the buildings, we can replace those market rate residents with affordable qualifying residents. So not a great answer on exactly how to do that, but I think there's probably a way, and we just need to be thoughtful about how to do that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think I was raising it just something to be cognizant of, and yeah, I forgot we were doing a pipeline.
And there was a question in the chat. Stefka, do you want to go ahead and speak about that? About the opportunity for other developers to add to the pipeline list?
Sure. I was just asking, if I think it's great that the county is putting that together. There's probably other folks that have shovel-ready pipeline projects that it would be great to kind of pull what everybody's doing together.
And can I just ask for clarification then? Are you suggesting that then the county, we could potentially use the ARPA funds then to invest in those other developers' projects? I just wanted to be clear.
Yes, if there's other folks developing affordable projects, that it would be good to know what else is out there.
And Stefka, would you be somebody that our folks with the county and the Regional Housing Partnership could contact to try to get some ideas on those developers that we might want to contact?
Yeah, I mean, I know we have a project that's underway right now. So I'm just thinking there's probably other folks on this call, maybe, that also have things that are in the pipeline.
Can I just add that the county is reaching out to each of the municipalities, not just the housing authorities, and asking for those projects. So, and I think you can add on to them if we miss things as well.
Yeah, exactly. We'll make that available either through, the shared Google Drive that we have here for folks to add to anybody on this group, or we'll find another mechanism for doing that.
Okay, whether based on the survey or just what you're desiring to see these funds, how they are to be used, does anybody have anything else they want to say before we talk about trying to narrow this list down to 3 to 5? Anna?
Yeah, I have a quick comment. I think that many of the items in the list are targeting home ownership, for example. And I think that while that's obviously an important topic for the housing crisis that we're experiencing, if we're thinking about the hardest hit in the pandemic and this issue of equity, I think that we should focus on affordable rental more than home ownership. So just increasing the number, the inventory is not enough to be equitable. The hardest hit are obviously low-income workers and families. I also want to elevate the issue of family homelessness, which is usually not a prominent topic when discussing homelessness. The first thing that comes to people's minds is usually encampments and single adults. But the issue of family homelessness is increasing as a result of the pandemic. And so I wanted to kind of like highlight that piece of homelessness before we have the, not homelessness as a whole, but specifically for families with kids. There's not a good alternative at this point. And so just wanted to elevate those two.
Thank you, Anna. And I, again, not proposing a solution, but just calling out that in the pipeline project, so in the kind of the list of the pipeline projects, there is or will be a wide array of housing options there: affordable rentals, affordable ownership, family rentals, senior. So there's certainly a diverse. There are diverse options there that we could look on and focus on accordingly if we were to decide to do that.
Thank you. For next steps, really, we're looking at these 3 to 5 big ideas. I'm going to share with you, I took some notes, and this is what I heard, is that there is some thoughts around the regional approach to home ownership, the working with developers, the county as well, regarding shovel-ready projects and seeing if we can enhance them. Resident-owned mobile home parks, having to do with whatever it is to keep people in those homes. And then Anna's added making sure that we're including affordable rent and addressing the increase in families who are homeless. And many of them, as Anna stated, work pandemic related, frontline workers who might have lost their jobs in the hospitality industry or whatever it is. So those are kind of the 5 big things I heard. That doesn't mean it's everything. And so I open the floor and to Paul and to everyone else, if there are other ideas beyond those 5 that you would like to see us dig deeper and perhaps form a committee to work on over the next 2 weeks. So again, you can raise your hand. Anne Marie?
Yeah, I'm hearing Anna's point about rents, and I think it's a really valid point. But I think part of the problem is lack of supply on rent, and that even if we were going to give people cash to rent a place, finding rentals that people could rent is challenging. So I guess I would like to have her amplify or explain what she thinks renters really need, whether it's cash assistance or whether we're focusing back on creating more rental housing because we don't have enough supply.
Anna, would you like to go ahead and give that a shot?
Sure. I think it's both. But I also think, I mean, I was more addressing the thing about like loans for home ownership, that kind of projects that were also listed there that I think, you know, are great programs, but it's not necessarily where I would focus. You know, I think that low income people don't usually get to own a house. You know, their income usually, even if it's subsidized, you know, so if we're gonna increase the inventory, you know, focusing more on making more units available for rent, as well as rent assistance, I think that's where I think we would have more impact on the people that have been hit the hardest. Does that make more, is it more clear now?
Well, I guess in the day-to-day work that you're seeing at EFA, if you had cash to give people, could they find a rental unit right now? Or are we focusing on cash assistance for people who need help with rental? Or are we focusing on creating rentals? At least in the eastern part of Boulder County, the issue seems to be lack of available rentals, period. And so that's a different question. That's more of a development question or a construction question than
So
cash.
I think they're related because obviously the less units you have, the higher the rent is, and therefore less people can afford it. So to me, they are intertwined. You know, if you have enough housing units, then the price would go down.
Okay, so it sounds like I think we're sort of in agreement that part of the issue is lack of supply of rental units, and that I think that's probably where we need to focus, because it will bring the price down if we create more units.
Yeah, I think it's both, but yeah, I think both will contribute to the solution.
Great. So we're going to go to Mary, then Michael, then Claire, then Kurt. And I did answer your question, Claire. I had mentioned affordable housing, affordable rents, I'm sorry, and homelessness of families. But again, that's just what the notes I took, and happy to hear if people heard things differently. So let's go to Mary.
Thank you. I just wanted to put there, as we start to sum up what we're hearing here, I didn't hear a facility for homeless or unhoused that has wraparound services, which I feel like is something that we should consider as a really big moonshot, which exists in other cities. And I just know, because I work in Longmont, that there is a big problem with people not having any housing at all, let alone, you know, the attainable, which I think is very important as well. And some of these reasons are because of addiction or because of mental health, and it might nicely tie into the health, the mental health other subgroup as something that we could leverage funds from both areas. So I just wanted to put it out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Michael.
Hi, thanks. My comment, I think, supports what Mary Lee was just saying, which was another kind of measure that would be nice to do is start thinking about the people at the bottom end and the people who are the most severely affected, and think about ranking those, giving those a kind of a higher weight as part of our way of approaching the whole equity issue. And so that might, as a result, do things like bump up some of the priorities of these other bucket categories, And it would also affect what Anna was suggesting, which is to give rental units, whether it's the supply of them or cash assistance to people who are having a hard time making them, but making the focus on any kind of aid to people who are in rental units. That might bump those up a little higher too, if we're giving slightly greater weight to the bottom end of the scale, where people who are suffering end up having to who's suffering, I want to say, is a bit higher than say people in the middle income who if they lose a house, they don't, I mean, they have other places that can go. So that was a suggestion about how to put some rankings in. And also I wanted to comment, because the list of 5 items, I think still includes the spending money, ARPA money, on shovel-ready projects, which I think is super important. But the net impact of that is we just free up that money as county money. And so my thought is that that doesn't really end up being a way of expending ARPA money, but rather a way of leveraging money to make it be have less strings attached. And so I would suggest that we take that off of the list of the big 5, include it as something that definitely is going to be done, but then think of it as feeding into the other buckets, and so focus the priorities on come up with a list of, or put something else in this top 5, with the assumption that the shovel ready idea is just something just to go forward with.
Thank you, Michael. Claire?
Thanks. So I have a question, but I have to say I did not understand, Michael, your last point. If everybody else did, then we don't need to come back to it, but I'm not sure I understood that. I was wondering, so I appreciated Anna's comment about homeownership maybe not being helpful to the people who really suffered the most in this pandemic and need the most help. But before we take it off the list, I don't know if that was what Anna was suggesting. I would like to know a little bit more about how low an income can you can target for a homeownership program, because I've read that people with incomes of 60% of AMI can manage. It's just going to depend on the size of the mortgage, right? So, I think I would like to know more about that. I see Stefka has gotten on. Yeah, I knew she would. I knew she would, because, and the reason I think I wanted to talk about homeownership from the outset was when I think about things that are going to be transformational. Yes, achieving financial security, economic security in an affordable rental is really, really important. But when we talk about the long-term trajectory of a household, it's that homeownership and the beginning of asset building that is really gonna be a total game changer, as opposed to just creating more room in a strained budget. And I don't mean to minimize how important that is, but it allows people to achieve some security, but it probably isn't going to really change the outcomes for kids over the next generation.
Can I answer the question, or do you want to move?
Yeah, please.
Sure, that makes sense. Oh, sorry, Paul. Yeah, sure.
So I want to start by answering your question, Claire, which is on the AMIs. So at Elevation Community Land Trust, we serve up to 80% of the area median income. We price our homes so that they're affordable at 70% of the area median income, but surprisingly, our average homeowner, and we have about 142 right now, is at 57% AMI. And that is because they're able to bring down payment assistance and things like that into play, so that can remain affordable and have a payment of under 33% of their income. That being said, I hate to get into these things where it's like homeownership is better than rental and rental is more important, because the fact is the entire spectrum is critical and each of those things are putting pressure on the other. And so it's really important, I believe, that we have a balanced investment, because as you know, as we put more and more investment into rental, and so just as an example, the Colorado Division of Housing in the last 2 years, 7% of their funding that went directly toward new development, only 7% was homeownership and the rest was rental. And so when we do that, what happens is we have this lowered supply of homeownership, and then it becomes something that is no longer attainable, not only to low income people, but to middle income people. And it's pushing further and further out so that only the very privileged will be homeowners in this next generation if we don't do something about it. And I agree, it is transformational. And moreover, that if we want to do something with equity, that groups, marginalized groups, have been locked out of homeownership for a very long time. And if there's something we can do to transform that, it is to create a path into equity building, you know, and homeownership obviously is that. So I think it's critical. I would also add that Habitat for Humanity serves, you know, in that sometimes as low as 40% AMI. In some areas. And I know in Longmont, they're serving folks that are between 40 and 60% AMI. In Boulder, it's a little bit closer to 60 to 80%.
Thank you, Stefka. Kurt?
Thank you. So what I'm going to suggest is that the buckets get a little bit bigger. I think there's certain things that we can combine that makes sense to me anyways. So the purchase of land or investing in the pipeline or purchasing existing apartment buildings and turning them into affordable projects, those kind of feel like the same bucket. And that's helping to create more units, primarily rental units. And there seems to be a lot of support around those things, but they kind of feel like one bucket to me. Some others I think that would go together in another bucket fall under sort of the category of regional capacity, and that's the capacity to create ownership units, the IH inclusionary housing capacity, and even the eviction prevention. That's a capacity that needs to be increased, and they're all sort of regional efforts. So possibly we could think of combining those, but we do need to understand sort of the resources that are required for each of those. And then I also wanted to just say I appreciated Anna's bringing up, you know, family homelessness, and that, you know, that it doesn't get the same sort of press or attention that single adults do. But I think some of the initiatives that we're talking about here create real opportunities for helping to solve family homelessness.
Thank you. Were those the only two buckets you saw, just combining everything, or?
No, I think there's still other buckets, but I thought that those
two could be, yeah,
those
okay.
two buckets could, you know, collect some things together.
It's interesting because Paul and I had that same conversation. So thank you.
Can I answer also?
Can we let Molly go first?
So I just wanted to tack on to the comment made about homelessness and wraparound services. So I will say that the projects that on that pipeline list that Longmont and the Longmont Housing Authority fed into it are part of Longmont's ARPA proposals as well. So this is a two-pronged comment. First of all, that there is unhoused options considered on there. And the second one is, well, three. The second one is that with the wraparound care, we just have to think about that is an ongoing operational cost. So if we fund maybe a limited number of years and then let funds build up for the ongoing manager to put those funds together. I'm just saying that the operations have been considered under ARPA in some, I've heard it somewhere in conversations about the possibility of that. We just have to look at that ongoing and what that commits the county to. And then my third comment is in putting Longmont's ARPA funded, some of them ARPA funded projects on that list, it really is opening up the invitation to do joint projects and pool funds if there's interest there. And this could be with other jurisdictions as well. Well, Boulder, since I think the other jurisdictions would be more reliant on Boulder County, but to pool funds and then serve goals of two organizations. So I just wanted to throw that in there. For example, the unhoused option we have on there, there's ideas to explore. It's still in the same, I agree with Kurt's buckets, and those fall in those buckets.
Great, thank you. Paul, did I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
No, I just raised my hand. I had a thought, but wanted to make sure I was respectful of those that had raised their hands.
Sure, do you want to share that thought?
Is Stefka ahead of me in line?
I think she spoke just before, unless Stefka, do you have something else too? Or is that just your hand up still?
Nope, I'm going to put my hand down. Sorry.
All right, no worries.
No problem. I just wanted to be sure. So a couple things I wanted to note. One, I think Leslie had made a reference to this earlier in terms of rental assistance. The county still has several $1 million that we're distributing via the emergency rental assistance program. The other thing, in terms of eviction prevention and family homelessness, I'm not sure if this applies or not, but through the county's housing stabilization program, that is kind of one of the main targets, is keeping families housed. So I think that is a case where we may have an existing program that could possibly help us with one of our goals and might be worth looking into. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, thank you. Anne?
Thanks so much. And yeah, just to kind of follow up on that, Paul, I do want to just and really appreciate Anna's comments, but I can't even quantify the number of homeless families that we've been working with the last couple of years, largely folks that certainly people who are experiencing domestic violence, but whose options around leaving that household have been increasingly limited, and those are folks that, for a variety of reasons, are eviction prevention isn't really an option. So they're cycling through our shelter, remaining in our shelter much longer than they ought to, or is it's also kind of interrupting capacity for people who are in crisis and need emergency shelter. So there's this sort of need for a holding space, and whether that's looking at is there the use of hoteling as kind of a transitional space for people, getting people out of if they're experiencing homelessness or if they're in emergency shelter, getting them out of that setting into something that's a little bit more stable while we're working at some of these other options. But I really do feel that if we don't look at the spectrum of need, I think it was Stefka that identified that what we end up just putting pressure on another end of that that sort of resource gap. So I'm, yeah, just again, just to kind of acknowledge that I'm hoping that we can look at this in terms of a number of different kind of resource pots along the pathway.
Great. Thank you so much. And Michael, were you trying to speak earlier and got interrupted?
Yeah, Claire mentioned that she didn't quite get the point that I was trying to make, and I was hoping to clarify that briefly. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I was understanding the suggestion is that just give a simplified model, ignoring administrative costs. But if we spend ARPA money on say, 5 million, say on shovel-ready projects, suppose that's what's available in the pipeline. But what that does is that frees up $5 million of county money already dedicated. Then the result is that we still have $5 million to spend. And it's just $5 million with different kinds of strings. And so my thought was that because that doesn't reduce the net amount of money that's available to spend, this really isn't a competing idea. It's something that helps us get more flexibility in how we spend the money. And so I was hoping to think of it as just a yes, definitely, let's go forward with it. And then the remaining question is, now what do we spend this money on? What buckets do we want to put that resulting money into? Does that make sense?
So Michael, thanks for the clarity. So you're not saying take it off the table at all. You're just saying if we do that and it does free up some other money in the county, we should be thinking about how that other money might be spent. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, well, the net result seems like we would still have $5 million to spend.
Okay, well, the one thing I wanted to say about that, this is just taking copious notes and trying to listen carefully to what everybody's been saying in our meetings, is that even though that was one of the reasons that someone stated that it would be good to add to these projects in the pipeline, the reasons I've heard over and over is that you can increase the impact that those projects have. So maybe it means adding units that are available, whether for rent or ownership or whatever. So it was more about making those more robust and having a bigger impact. If I've got that wrong, though, I'd be happy for someone to correct me, but that's what I heard in addition to potentially freeing up extra money.
Karen, I'm just going to jump in and not wait for you to call on me. That's
go for it.
Yeah, that's what I had. I think I had mentioned this in our first meeting to put it on the list, and it was so that, say, the existing proposal would serve people at 50 or 60% of AMI, and if we could put some funding in to buy it down so it could serve people at 30% of AMI. So it doesn't exactly free up money in that way. But I think, Michael's point is good, that there might be other projects where that's what we do, is we free up money. But I think my hope was that we would use these funds to increase the affordability.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well, as far as increasing affordability. And they're also, I think, on some of these pipeline projects, they're not all necessarily fully funded. I mean, some are further down the pipeline than others. So I think that there are gaps in funding for some of them, just at the most basic level of getting the project to move forward.
And on that note, we have a little less than 45 minutes left. And I sort of try to sum up what I've heard. We've had some really great input, and Kurt had suggested some of that, kind of putting together some of these different items, which I think is a great idea. I tried to take pretty good notes. So we have one of the ideas that is pretty comprehensive, and it would include purchase of land, purchase of buildings, investing in the pipeline, and basically creating more units, whether they're for home ownership or for rental. So that's one bucket. And so I'm wondering if we want to try to chew on each one a little bit and see who all wants to kind of be on that committee and work together for the next 2 weeks and diving deeper. And we know we're going to be getting that list from staff that hopefully will be inclusive for Boulder County projects as well as some of the developers projects that relate to what we're talking about. So do we want to have a little conversation about that first and see if there's people interested? And if there's anyone who feels really strongly like that is not something we should be pursuing, let us know. So either, yes, this is a great idea, and yes, I want to be on that team, or if you feel otherwise. And Claire, did you want to say something, or is your hand still up?
No, I did want to say something. I think we should talk about whether home ownership belongs in the same bucket as rental because of just the different ways in which funds are invested and the different challenges. I would say they should not be in the same bucket because I think they're just different challenges.
I agree. And moreover, I would add that it's a lot to put in one bucket. Like by having only those kind of two very large buckets, we're going to have really large groups talking about it. And so I'm just concerned that it might not be as efficient and effective as having smaller groups on smaller topics where we can really dig into getting a plan together.
So what we could do is say we have 2 buckets right now that we've identified that we for sure want to move forward on. And one is basically home ownership, increasing home ownership, accessibility and availability, or however home ownership will look. And then there is helping with rental assistance. And I guess the question I have is, would providing short-term housing for the homeless be included in that? And if so, those are 2 pretty big buckets as well that could encompass a lot of the different things we've talked about. And Paul, jump in if you have some thoughts too, please.
Well, I think what you raised there, Karen, brings up the question of maybe rental assistance isn't the bucket. It's more, is it, housing stability, preventing homelessness, eviction whatever. I think it's maybe speaks to a larger picture of what we're trying to accomplish if we look at it that way. But that's just a thought.
That's a great point. Mary?
I would advocate for homelessness to be its own category. I think it's a different set of problems. Again, I do think that there's a crossover with the health group as well there. So I think it's worth in small groups talking about how the wraparound services in a facility have worked in other cities is enough to chew off for that.
Thank you. Stefka?
I think that there's also 2 categories that we're talking about here beyond like homeownership rental. I think there's also the development of new units, right? Which I think we've heard multiple times, multiple people said that that's a priority. And then there's other housing services, right? So that are just as important, right? Things like eviction prevention and wraparound services for homeless and, sort of the services component. And I think that could easily be separated out, even within home ownership. If we're taught there's the creation of new units versus services and programs supporting entry, for example.
Thank you. Anna?
Just a quick question. When we are talking about home ownership, are we including like manufactured homes and other easy to deploy, more economic types of construction? Are we thinking of the traditional, apartment house?
Well, that's a great question. And I think mobile home parks have been talked about as both home ownership, affordable housing, rental, sustainability, addressing a whole gambit of things. And don't forget that we need to do a moonshot, right? Something really innovative, which that is something that could fall into it as well. So I'm getting a little concerned that we have just a little over a half hour to try to figure out what are these 3 to 5 areas we're going to focus on, and breaking then into groups of who will be doing the research, working on these in the next 2 weeks. So if Anne Marie, do you have something to say that'll help that move forward?
No, unfortunately, what I have to say, I think complicates things. One of the things, as you're talking about housing development, the regulatory framework and the permitting, planning, entitlement process in some communities is harder than others, and also the regulatory framework in those communities. And I'm wondering if there needs to be a group looking at some sort of streamlining in the regulatory arena to incentivize local governments to build more housing through a streamlined regulatory process of some kind. And maybe that's another bucket or group.
Okay, thank you for that idea. I also am concerned about now adding a whole different idea and bucket, just because we have so many, we're trying to narrow them down. Although what you're saying, of course, is fair.
I think
Kurt,
I was just going to say, I think it's an overarching bucket that makes it difficult. Rather than being a bucket of its own, kind of like equity, it's one of the obstacles, I think, to creating new housing, and an overarching thing that covers several areas rather than its own bucket per se.
Sorry, Karen, you're on mute.
I know I keep unmuting. I don't know why it's happening. Did it happen again?
You're good.
Okay, Kurt, did you have anything else to add?
Sure. So I think Anne Marie brings up a good point. It feels like it's outside of the scope of this, because this is a more of a funding conversation, but that's something that I think is sort of a separate group, and the Regional Housing Partnership really cares about and wants to support. I'll just put that out there. I'm sort of seeing 3 buckets, and other people may want to add on. The 3 buckets I'm seeing are sort of the pipeline component, which is mostly, I assume, is going to be mostly rental units. So it's pipeline, it's land, supporting projects, lowering AMIs, that sort of thing. The second bucket feels like home ownership. And the third bucket to me feels like regional capacity to stand up some of the programs, like or increase the capacity and impact of eviction prevention, inclusionary housing, and the infrastructure for ownership. And then under the second bucket of home ownership, I think that manufactured housing infrastructure for resident-owned communities could also potentially go underneath that.
Could you say that last sentence again?
Yeah, so manufactured home communities that have been brought up around improving infrastructure. And I think that's either a bucket on its own, or maybe it fits under ownership. I think either one would be fine.
Thank you. Given what Kurt just suggested, the other thing we talked about was potentially having a separate bucket that's just homelessness. Would we like to do that? Are there enough people? Raise your hand who believe that there should be a bucket on homelessness? So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so right now, and Paul, you might be taking really great notes too. So please weigh in. We've got the pipeline, which is seen as being including a lot of rental and supporting projects. Which is also buying and purchasing land acquisition, that sort of thing. 2, we have home ownership. 3, we have regional capacity, so that stand up some programs like eviction prevention, inclusionary housing, infrastructure. And then the mobile home parks can fit under home ownership. And then we have a 4th bucket of homelessness. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Okay, so I'm not sure how we want to do this. One thing I thought of is people could put their names in the chats and say which one they want to belong to. So again, it's the land acquisition pipeline projects with supporting projects. It's the home ownership, which I'm not exactly sure how that's different, but it's home ownership. The 3rd is regional capacity for those stand-up programs like eviction prevention, inclusionary housing. And then we've got the homelessness. So we've got Anne Marie Jensen.
What I propose is, sorry to interrupt, but I think that an easier way may be to create like a Word document and share the link and, write down the 4.
Oh,
and,
good idea.
And then you can just like have people add their name. So that way you have an idea of who's in which group. If there's too many in one group, people can move themselves to another group. I'm happy to create one and share my screen, but you can also do it.
That would be great. And if you're willing to do that, and while you're doing that, it might be nice, if we want to talk a little bit about the home ownership. We've already said that the manufactured or mobile home parks would fit under that. What else do we see fitting under that? And Michael, I see you have your hand up, and I'm not sure if you have an answer to that.
No, but just a question for clarification. I think if I read the survey results right, one of the bigger priorities was purchase of rental housing, and I'm not seeing how that would fit into any of the existing buckets yet. And I was curious if the thought of those buckets is that would happen.
That's a great question. What I heard Kurt say is that would fall under the first one. So it's land acquisition, projects in the pipeline, and it would create rental and home ownership, I think, although maybe it's just rental, trying to focus on that. And then we've got the separate one for home ownership, which would be the mobile home parks. And please jump in and Claire, if you've got some more clarity around that.
Well, so you were asking to put some flesh on the bones about home ownership in addition to manufactured housing parks, and I would see this the program that Kurt has described of purchasing attached homes, whether they're townhomes, condos, whatever they are, and selling them below market. So I would see that in the homeownership bucket. I would also see, depending on what STEPCO might have in the works or Habitat, any other existing program that works on homeownership, investing in that. So I think there are opportunities there. I think we should be looking beyond the mobile home parks for that. And I did wonder whether legal assistance belongs, well, Kurt has put that together with just creating the infrastructure or the administrative support for inclusionary housing ordinances and homeownership programs. And legal assistance feels to me, more like it's just an investment of money into an organization, and it can be in eviction prevention. It could be around other, consumer debt problems that people accrue because they're trying to pay rent. The landlord always eats first, sorts of things. It just doesn't feel to me like it belongs with the other regional issues. I mean, I think the service has to be regional. I get that, but the other two feel to me like we're trying to create an administrative structure for a program.
Thank you. Anne Marie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say post-fire, the biggest need I've seen for renters in interviewing and talking to them is legal assistance. And it's also spread beyond Louisville and Superior to other neighborhoods. And so, for example, because they can charge more now because of the renter shortage, we see landlords doing things to force renters to break their lease, create uninhabitable units so that they can terminate the lease and charge more. And those are all rental things that I think are regional and are about keeping people housed. So I would support Kurt in thinking that this is part of the infrastructure regionally that I think is important. And I actually think can save us lots of money, in the long run if we can help people with the legal assistance.
And which bucket were you thinking that should go in, Anne Marie?
I think Kurt had put it in the regional capacity bucket.
So just add legal consultation to that?
Well, it's eviction defense, it's legal assistance, it's all of those things for renters. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Paul, is there anything else you'd like to say about these groups and the survey and where we've ended up right now?
No, not at all. I think our discussion's been very productive, and thank everybody for the ideas that we have. I think this is a step forward for us to establish these buckets. And if we want to kind of sign up and get moving on putting together some very specific ideas, I think that maybe we can try to do some more non-meeting communication over the next 2 weeks. Our next meeting is 2 weeks from today. And then, we come to that final meeting with some very concrete ideas. This is our proposal in this area. I think that, we really need to move at that point. And I think that, one thing it might help to communicate between the groups as much as we can, or between the ideas. I think, we need balance here. So there's obviously the balance of funding that would be available for any idea. We're not restricted to just one idea here, I don't think. So it's what can we make within the allotted money? What can we make work? And then also just other areas of balancing between different populations that would benefit from our different ideas, or balancing for any real equity standpoint. And then also, I think, balance in terms of time. So some solutions may be really quick to implement, some may be longer. So I think that it would be good for us to try to maybe keep some of that in mind as we go through this next part of the process, and just make sure that we're communicating with each other.
That sounds great. And so make sure that you engage the link that was shared, and put your name under the bucket that you would like to see yourself working in. And just remember that you all, as you're working together in those 2 weeks, as Paul was saying, you may come up with something really completely different and very innovative in how to address whatever the topic is that you're looking into.
And I would just throw out there right now, I mean, we haven't really talked specifically about it. We've alluded to it a couple of times, but does anybody have a real moonshot idea here that we want to put to paper at this point? You know, granted, any of the groups could decide to do that within their topic area, but I think maybe we take a few minutes to see, are there any really bold, big ideas in our group? Mary?
I think for the county to move away from shelter for homeless people to housing for homeless people would be a wonderful thing. That's my moonshot.
Well, I have almost exactly the opposite question, Mary Lee, and I don't work with homeless directly, and you can tell me if I'm off base, but some folks I've been talking to who do work with the homeless are telling me that what we really are focusing on with the homeless is, with the housing first model, is the belief that if we can just get people housed, we can move them into what you just said, housing, right? Not shelter. But that there are a group of the homeless who, for whatever reason, don't really want to be housed or struggle with other issues that make it very difficult for them to be housed. And we don't like to talk about them. And we don't like to talk about how to, you know, keep them safe in bad weather, how to give them showers, you know, whatever it might be, and that really difficult population tends to get ignored in the housing first or shelter first model. And I wondered what thoughts you might have on that.
Well, that is certainly a problem where we have shelters that say, you know, you have to be, you know, you cannot have had any alcohol or any drugs in your system to go there. I mean, that's something. That's not a moonshot to me. That's just another shelter next to the shelter we already have. The shelter that doesn't let you in if you have alcohol in your breath, there's the shelter that does. But the idea that there are people ready to be case managed out of this situation, and I think speaking to the homeless families, and especially I think people coming out of domestic abuse, and opening that capacity. I just feel like if we did the moonshot of a building that was your own studio, much like assisted living for elderly, but it was for homeless, we would open capacities in other places. I would welcome the opportunity to do some research on that.
Great, thank you. So we've got a lot of hands up. We're going to try to get to everyone as we discuss more about this moonshot idea. Michael?
Sure. I think this is a pretty big moonshot, in part because I'm not sure how attractive it is to many people. But the goal would be to really look at the way the economics work and the incentives work. And the suggestion that I put in briefly was a rental licensing system with strong carrots and sticks, where the idea is if you raise the rent at high rates over the years, you end up being penalized, and then that money is fed back into assisting people who are displaced. But the bigger idea behind kind of an aggressive licensing system is just to rejigger the incentives so that that anybody who's a landlord is incentivized to provide stable housing to whoever rents their units from them. And so they make more profit from providing stable housing than they do for getting people out of their houses if people elsewhere can afford to come into those same units. And so that would, I think, have an immense effect on stability. I think it would also keep the rates from going up all that quickly within the market, and it would prevent all kinds of the needs to provide rental assistance.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to have to cut you off just because I want to make sure everybody gets heard and we're running out of time. So thank you very much. Molly?
So first of all, I think that the regional partnership options are a moonshot if we're defining moonshot as something that's transformational, that changes the way that we do affordable housing going forward. I'm thinking transformational in that is there no other funding source that works for this? And currently that is something that would be challenging to fund otherwise. I also think a moonshot is affordable assisted living and unhoused options for those that are difficult to house, meaning those that have records with meth use they can't get into housing authority properties or HUD funded properties. It's really hard to house those folks, and they're often chronic, rotating in and out of either subsidized housing or not. And I think that coming up with a model, either just acquiring somewhere, acquiring property, converting, and then coming up with a model that can be replicated in the future. This is the opportunity to experiment with funding sources that do not exist for this purpose, and that could be replicated going forward.
Thank you, Molly. Anne?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to throw out, and it doesn't feel like a moonshot, but at least getting us a little further away from the earth, which is really investing in a non-shelter option for family homelessness. And I think I might have mentioned last time that this has been a conversation in the kind of among folks working with families experiencing homelessness for whatever reason, domestic violence or otherwise, for quite some time. And whether that's investing in hoteling or buying a hotel or setting aside funds, but we have to get a handle on the fact that we as a community have, aside from a very limited space in a domestic violence shelter, we have no options for families experiencing homelessness.
Thank you, Anne. Kurt?
Thank you. Just want to make one clarification. The homeless shelters in Boulder County, and I know specifically in Boulder, they don't restrict individuals who are high or on drugs or anything from receiving shelter. It's more about behavior, and they're not allowed to use while they're in the shelter. But it doesn't restrict people from accessing the shelter. Just want to clarify that. And then,
can I say, Kurt, that in Longmont we only have 3 places, and one of them does restrict on that. So I mean, it is an issue. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual for a shelter to have those requirements. The second thing is around homelessness, and I know mental health is a challenge, but what we find is that people aren't successful in receiving mental health services or drug abuse services unless they get housed first. And I think that's why the housing first approach is so needed. And so I think whatever we do should be try to be in alignment with that where we can.
Thank you, Kurt. I don't see any other hands up right now, except for folks who have talked before, so I'm just assuming they haven't put their hands down. We have just a little over 10 minutes to talk about next steps. And so we have this interactive document. Thank you, Anna, for getting that started for us. people are putting their names on the list. How do folks want to follow up with each other? I'm not sure how we want to do that, and I'm open to some thoughts here. And Paul, maybe you have some ideas.
I don't know if it's best to maybe have a lead in each group. So not, not necessarily for somebody to take on the added burden, but more just to be a communication lead, just to make sure that you are facilitating communication among your folks. And maybe if you're willing to do that, maybe put your name in bold on the document. That'll denote that you're a lead. That's one thought.
And then would we finalize this document in the next day or two and then send it out to everybody by email? And the reason I asked the question is I know there's a couple of people who had to pop off early who might want to sign up yet. Maybe what we could do is send out the list in the next 24 hours, and then people can bold if they or step up if they'd like to lead a group, which really would just mean, emailing folks and kind of handling when, when you meet and that sort of thing. I see Kurt's offering to lead with the regional capacity. Mary Lee said she would lead with the homelessness group. So looking for homeownership and pipeline. And I'm not sure, Kurt or Claire, if you have anything more to add, if those are new raised hands.
Yeah, mine is a new raised hand. I feel like we're spreading ourselves too thin here. I'm just worried with 4 buckets and we've got basically 3 people in each. That's a lot of, well, it's a lot for 3 people to take on. It's also not a lot of people to help bring ideas together. I know, we did some great work and these buckets make a lot of sense. I'm just concerned about how much is on the shoulders of, basically 3 people per group.
Mary Lee, did you want to say something about that?
I did. I am going to be the devil's advocate and say 3 people can create a draft that people can pick apart, well researched, and I think quicker than a larger group of people can do it. So I think if we have, 12 people, that can we have 4 proposals, reports, whatever? I think so. And then we can go from there. And I'm in the same boat as Anna in terms of spring break, but for me, it means I have capacity. So, yeah. So I feel like, sometimes when you're going into subgroups, you want them to be kind of, slim and fast moving,
Any other thoughts about this approach?
I think that I see some names repeating. So I think that it's 3 people, but sometimes the people are the same people. So I do think that I would like to see some more people contributing.
Anne?
Yeah, I just wanted to note Laura's comments sounded like she needed to hop off, but she was suggesting that the homelessness and pipeline buckets get put together.
How do the homelessness folks feel about going under the pipeline?
I mean, the way I was envisioning it, it's very much a different thing. It is about the population for the reasons that people have made concerns about. How do we even get this population of people housed with their issues? I think that if it was anything, it's going to go over under like the health subgroup at some point. So I just think that it can be under that, but I think it's a whole separate issue about where our wraparound services in actual housing for people who were formerly sheltered. Where is that happening? That's what I was kind of envisioning that this group would do, and they could do it in any place.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mary Lee. I do think that there is some certainly some overlap here with our behavioral health working group. I also just, you know, again, it's almost like equity in a way. As we look at everything we're doing here through equity, we could also state that each one of the top 3 buckets, if done correctly, could and should have an impact on homelessness. So I don't know about, you know, combining it with pipelines so much as having it be informed, you know, an informed part of all the other groups.
Is it worth researching sort of in a silo, understanding that it would then be kind of, you know, how does it absorb into something else?
Well, I was going to say, if it's in the same bucket as just the pipeline to create more units that are affordable, it's really treating it as just an issue of supply and creating more units for people who are unhoused, as opposed to recognizing something, maybe some unique needs and challenges. So I think we're not going to get a proposal that would include wraparound services. I think that's one reason to keep it separate. But having said that, I need to remind everybody that the county commissioners, along with our staff, who are going to give us a lot of help and input and analysis of all of these, are going to have to make these decisions in the end, what to invest these funds in. And you know, we do take an approach that dealing with the homelessness, and Paul, please correct me if I'm wrong, that we really don't want to invest a lot of money in shelter that does not lead to exiting homelessness. And so anything that would you know, be recommended in that homelessness category should be recommended with that in mind, that it needs to be something that leads to exiting homelessness and not just providing shelter.
And I know we don't have any more time, but I would also say, if we go way, way, way back, who was the most impacted? When you had to shelter at home, who was the most impacted? And when the shelters had to close down because of COVID, who was the most impacted? So I do think there's a strong, you know, appeal there to this, you know, identified group.
Thank you. Kurt, do you have your hand raised to add to the conversation?
I do. I'll just be real quick. So it might be helpful, and I can send this to the homeless team. So there has been a proposal that's been put together for ARPA funds for the city of Boulder that provides what we have seen as a capacity need, which is increased wraparound services and support for those who have become housed, who were previously homeless, and ensuring that they remain successfully housed and you know, receive the services they need to do that. So it's more than just getting people into housing. So I could share that with the group, and if they saw some value in that, or expanding it into other areas, it might be helpful.
That would be great, Kurt, if you want to share that with the group. And then we're also, another item we're waiting for is that list that we'll get for shovel-ready projects. Also, we will take this sign-up sheet and we'll make sure to send it to the whole group, because there are some people who aren't here, who had to leave early, who might want to sign up. Looks like we have a lead for every group except the first one. So just to keep that in mind, if you are in the first one and you would be willing to lead, you can note that on the sheet. And we just have a couple minutes left. If there's anything else, or Paul, if you want to say anything about the process, next steps.
No, just that, I'm not sure as county staff, my role. I mean, I can join a group, or I could support a group or offer general support as needed. So just let me know.
And I kind of wondered the same thing about myself, which I'm happy to go on to one of these groups as well, if that's seen as appropriate.
Can each of you go on to 2 groups and then we'd have it covered?
I'm not sure what you mean, because what I was thinking is if Paul wanted to act like more of an administrator for the groups and support, then I could actually go on a group and fully participate. And I was thinking about the home ownership and the mobile home parks. I mean, I don't think we need to have one or both of us at each meeting, unless I'm missing something here.
I think she was saying like each one of you volunteers to be part of 2 of these 4. So you split the groups and you support 2 groups each. That's what I understood.
And thank you. And I think that what I was and then you're just keeping us in the guardrails. And then you would actually, as our co-chair people, understand if there's overlap and things like that. But you might not have that capacity. So, but that was just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would, but I could, I could definitely join one group.
Yeah, and I'm willing to join and support as needed, whether it's joining all 4 groups or supporting all groups. I think, I'll be prepared and whatever the group thinks that they need, the larger group.
So it sounds like maybe Paul and I can have a little conversation about that after the meeting.
Right, you could be consultants, right, that we call in as needed to our groups.
Absolutely.
Sure. All right, it's 5 o'clock. We got a lot done.
Yeah, we finished on time. What an amazing accomplishment.
Yes, we did.
Well,